The studio lights of the National Policy Forum gleamed like white fire, cutting sharp contrasts across the stage where two women faced each other. On one side sat Pam Bondi, Florida's former Attorney General, polished, composed, wrapped in a crimson blazer that radiated confidence and control. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas's 30th District leaned slightly forward, her calm but steady focus revealing the quiet intensity beneath her measured tone. For nearly 20 minutes, the segment, billed as a discussion on voting rights, had slowly turned into a fiery duel. Moderator Robert Donovan, a veteran journalist known for his cool composure, was now visibly struggling to keep order as both women clashed passionately over data, intent, and interpretation. The air crackled with tension. Every glance, every pause, carried weight. And then, unexpectedly, the entire energy shifted. Crockett opened her leather portfolio and withdrew a folded sheet of paper, its edges slightly worn. "Ms. Bondi," she said evenly, sliding it across the glass table. "Before you continue, I'd like you to take a look at this." The camera zoomed in. The paper bore the official seal of the Florida Attorney General's office. Dated March 17, 2018. The moment the logo appeared on screen, a ripple of curiosity swept through the control room. Bondi's poised expression flickered. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the document. Then silence, complete, heavy, unnatural silence for live television. Later, one crew member would whisper, "You could have heard a pin drop." All eyes were locked on Bondi as her confidence slipped into surprise, then disbelief. After what felt like an eternity, 30 seconds of unbroken quiet, she finally spoke. "Congresswoman Crockett," Bondi began, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I've never seen this report before. And if what you're showing me is correct," she paused, visibly weighing her words, "then I may need to reevaluate my stance." The control room erupted into stunned whispers. Moments like this, unscripted, raw, genuine, simply didn't happen on political TV. But the real shock came seconds later. Bondi reached up, unhooked her earpiece, and set it gently on the table, disconnecting herself from her advisors. Then she looked directly at Crockett and said 7 simple words that would echo across the internet for weeks. "Let's have a real conversation about this." Donovan's producer immediately called for a commercial break. When the show returned, millions of viewers were witnessing something rare. Two ideological opposites abandoning the pre-scripted theater of politics for a genuine, unscripted exchange. What unfolded over the next half hour would permanently alter how audiences viewed televised political debates. Before we reveal the contents of that mysterious document and why it shook the foundation of the discussion, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. This channel shines a spotlight on transformative moments in American politics, moments the mainstream often overlooks because democracy is more than endless bickering. It's about rediscovering the power of authentic dialogue. Now let's return to the debate. As the discussion resumed, the atmosphere was charged but focused. Bondi cited instances of voting irregularities from the 2020 election, while Crockett countered with challenges about how those examples were interpreted and applied. When Crockett pointed out the reduction of polling sites in certain low-income areas, Bondi pushed back, asking for evidence. Yet what surprised the audience, and soon, social media, was that neither woman resorted to sound bites. They were actually listening. Around the 20-minute mark, Donovan redirected the exchange toward federal voting legislation, specifically, the Freedom to Vote Act. He asked Crockett to explain its purpose and reminded viewers that Bondi had raised concerns about federal overreach. Crockett began to defend the bill's goals, but then she paused. Her expression shifted, thoughtful, deliberate, as if she had decided to take the conversation somewhere unexpected. "You know what, Robert?" she said quietly. "I think we're missing something essential here." She reached once more into her folder, pulled out the same document, and turned to Bondi. "Before we continue, I want you to read this." The camera tightened its focus as Crockett explained calmly, "This came from your office, dated March 17th, 2018. Instantly, the energy changed. The on-screen Chiron still read partisan showdown voting rights debate, but what was happening now was something entirely different." Bondi's confidence faltered. Her brows furrowed as she looked down at the paper. "What exactly am I looking at, Congresswoman?" she asked, her tone guarded. Crockett answered without hesitation. "It's an internal analysis your office conducted under your leadership. It outlines documented issues stemming from the voter ID law defended in court during your tenure." Bondi flipped the page slowly. The silence was absolute. Crockett continued. "That section notes over 27,000 registered voters, mostly elderly, rural or low income, who faced significant barriers obtaining valid identification. There's also a case study of a 78-year-old veteran in Pensacola who made 3 failed trips trying to get the right ID. The cameras caught Bondi blinking, visibly processing. This wasn't theater. It was real. After nearly half a minute of silence, Bondi finally looked up. Her voice was lower now, almost reflective. "Congresswoman Crockett, I've never seen this report. If what you're showing me is true," she paused, "then I need to reconsider my position. Inside the control booth, chaos. Producers whispering, directors signaling, 'Don't cut away.' Donovan's earpiece crackled with a single command. 'Stay with this. This is history.'" Then came the moment that would redefine the segment. Bondi gently removed her earpiece, cutting off her handlers entirely, and repeated softly, "Let's have a real conversation about this." When they returned from break, everything felt different. The tension had melted into something respectful, even collaborative. Bondi spoke first. "Let me be clear," she began. "Election integrity matters deeply to me, but every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot without unnecessary barriers. If this document is accurate, and it appears to be, then we overlooked genuine issues that need fixing." Crockett nodded. "That's exactly why I brought it, Pam, because I believe you when you say you care about fairness. This isn't about sides. It's about what's real." Bondi studied the document again, shaking her head slightly. "What I can't understand," she said softly, "is how this never reached my desk. A report like this should have shaped our policy decisions." Crockett smiled faintly. "That's the bigger problem. We're often operating from completely different sets of facts. We might share the same goal, protecting every legitimate vote, but we're seeing different versions of reality." What followed next stunned the industry. For 15 uninterrupted minutes, viewers watched an honest, fact-driven discussion, not a fight. They dissected how laws worked in practice, shared real stories of voters turned away, and acknowledged legitimate cases of fraud prevention that worked as intended. "My issue isn't with voter verification," Crockett explained. "It's how implementation sometimes creates unequal burdens. In Houston, for example, we documented average wait times of 23 minutes in white neighborhoods versus over 100 minutes in predominantly Black and Latino ones." Bondi didn't deflect. She nodded. "Then that's something we have to address. Implementation matters. If certain communities face greater hurdles, that's unacceptable, regardless of intent. From there, they found unexpected common ground, expanding early voting, modernizing registration systems, even limiting partisan poll watchers who intimidated voters. Then Bondi shared a personal story. "My father's 87. He's voted in every election since 1956. In 2020, he almost couldn't vote because of an ID mix-up. He had his military ID, perfectly valid, but a poll worker insisted he needed a driver's license, which he no longer has. Another worker had to intervene." Crockett leaned forward. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. The law said his ID was valid, but implementation failed him." Robert Donovan barely spoke, knowing he was witnessing something extraordinary. Then, in a moment that cemented the segment's legacy, Bondi turned to Crockett and asked, "Congresswoman, if you could design a system that guarantees both easy access for every eligible voter and strong verification, what would it look like?" It wasn't a trap. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, one that signaled something remarkable. Two opponents, no longer debating for cameras, but finally discussing solutions. It was an invitation to problem solve. Crockett responded with a detailed plan: automatic registration using secure government databases, multiple forms of ID verification, expanded early voting with standardized hours across states, and updated voting equipment with paper backups. Bondi didn't sign off on every detail, but she didn't dismiss it either. Automatic registration makes sense if the databases are reliable and citizenship is verified. I'd also want regular audits to ensure accuracy. What emerged wasn't perfect consensus, but something far more valuable. A roadmap built on shared principles instead of partisan sound bites. As the program neared its final segment, the control room was buzzing. Producers Cutter planned content to extend this extraordinary exchange. Camera operators were instructed to capture every reaction. Meanwhile, social media was lighting up with viewers posting in disbelief at seeing two political figures actually listen to each other. Finally, Donovan rejoined the conversation. "We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like our viewers to understand just how significant this is. Miss Bondi, you came in today with firm positions on voting rules. Has this discussion shifted your perspective in any way?" Bondi, whose career was built in strong conservative advocacy, did something rare for political television. She admitted her views were evolving. "Yes, Robert, it has," she said with sincerity. "I still believe election integrity is critical. But Congresswoman Crockett has helped me see gaps in implementation that I hadn't fully appreciated. When veterans like my father or other eligible citizens face needless barriers, that's not defending democracy. That's undermining it." She held up the internal report Crockett had introduced earlier. "This shows who identified issues but didn't fix them. That's a failure I have to own, and it makes me wonder what other blind spots exist in the policies I've supported." Donovan then turned to Crockett. "And Congresswoman, has anything in Miss Bond's perspective influenced your own thinking today?" Crockett nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. I've been sophocused on removing barriers that I haven't always acknowledged. Valid concerns about verification. Miss Bond's emphasis on building systems that ensure both accessibility and security makes perfect sense. We shouldn't have to choose between those values." The camera caught Bondi surprised, but genuine smile at Crockett's admission. Another authentic moment in a broadcast full of them. "What I value most about this exchange," Crockett said, "is that we've moved past broad principles and into the details of how voting laws actually work in practice. That's where solutions can be found." Moderator Robert Donovan, fully aware that the cameras were capturing something historic, voiced the question viewers at home were already asking: where do we go from here? Is this just an unusual TV moment, or could this conversation lead to real collaboration? The two women exchanged a thoughtful glance. Bondi spoke first. "I think there's genuine potential to find common ground on specific reforms. Not total agreement because we still have different priorities, but enough to make meaningful progress." Turning directly to Crockett, she added, "Congresswoman, would you be open to working together on best practices for voter ID laws in states that already have them? Not debating whether the laws should exist, but ensuring they're implemented without creating unfair burdens." It was not a vague nod to bipartisanship. It was a concrete offer. Crockett looked taken back for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I would. And I'd add that we should expand the discussion to best practices for early voting systems and poll worker training. If we can establish standards that both protect access and safeguard security, that would be a real step forward," Bondi agreed. "I think that's possible. At the end of the day, we both want elections where every eligible voter can participate and where results reflect the will of the people. Our differences are in the methods, not the ultimate goal." As they continued, viewers saw something extraordinary. Two politicians from opposite sides genuinely seeking common ground without surrendering their core beliefs. The conversation reached its most powerful point when Donovan asked why this moment felt so different from the political debates Americans usually see. Crockett answered first, because we stopped performing for our audiences and started listening. Wenham's Bondi engaged with the real challenges of implementation instead of dismissing them. The tone completely changed. Bondi nodded. And when Congresswoman Crockett acknowledged that security concerns aren't all just voter suppression, it opened space for real discussion. Honestly, I think taking out my earpiece helped too. Sometimes our teams lock us into fight mode when we might otherwise find common ground. As the segment neared its end, Donovan asked one last question. Could this kind of exchange become more common in our politics? Or is this just a rare exception? The pause before their answers said everything. Bondi finally spoke. I think it's possible, but it requires something that's become rare, a willingness to be persuaded publicly by new evidence. Too often we're focused on winning the argument that we forget the point of having the argument, Crockett agreed. It also requires spaces where true conversation can happen. Most political media is designed for conflict, not for solutions. Fierce disagreements bring ratings, but they don't bring answers. What people really want is exactly this: an honest discussion of complex issues. The real world isn't simple, and Americans deserve better than the stage theater we usually give them. Donovan wrapped up by thanking both women for one of the most remarkable political conversations I've witnessed in 30 years of journalism. The cameras lingered on Bondi and Crockett shaking hands. It wasn't the forced handshake of political rivals, but the genuine gesture of mutual respect. What no one realized at that moment was just how much this single exchange would reshape expectations for political dialogue in the weeks ahead. By the time Bondi and Crockett left the National Policy Forum studio, clips of their conversation were spreading like wildfire online. What started as a trending hashtag quickly became a cultural event, with millions calling it the conversation America needed. News outlets scrambled to frame the moment. Some tried to declare winners and losers, missing the bigger shift. Others speculated it had been staged, but insiders confirmed both women were as surprised as the audience by how the dialogue unfolded. Within 24 hours, the full segment had been viewed over 12 million times across platforms. The hashtag #Real Conversation dominated social media as Americans voiced frustration with typical political theater and excitement about seeing something authentic. Major newspapers and magazines ran headlines like "When Political." Opponents actually listened the Bondi Crockett moment, and could one broadcast change the way we talk about voting? Rights. Media critics were equally struck. One wrote, for the first time in modern political television, two leaders weren't performing. They were thinking aloud in real time. Then 3 days later, Bondi and Crockett stunned observers again. In a joint announcement, they revealed they would co-chair a bipartisan working group dedicated to improving how voting systems are implemented. The group would bring together election officials from both parties, security experts, and voting rights advocates. Their mission statement was clear. Our goal isn't to argue abstract principles, but to solve the real practical problems voters face. How do we make sure voter ID rules don't create unnecessary burdens? How do we keep voter rolls accurate without pushing eligible citizens out of the system? How do we train poll workers so procedures are applied fairly everywhere? Crockett asked. These are real practical challenges that go beyond party politics. What made this collaboration stand out was that neither woman abandoned her core beliefs in later appearances. Bondi continued stressing the importance of election security, while Crockett stayed committed to expanding access. But both began addressing each other's concerns with greater nuance, acknowledging the validity of issues they once might have dismissed outright. The ripple effect went far beyond the two of them. Other political programs started testing new formats that encouraged deeper exchanges. Some extended debate segments without commercial interruptions. Others rewarded guests for directly answering opposing arguments rather than pivoting back to talking points. To the surprise of many producers, audiences responded positively. We've learned that respect and substance can actually boost engagement if it's presented the right way, one executive explained. The biggest breakthrough came 6 months later, when the bipartisan working group led by Bondi and Crockett released its recommendations for improving voting systems. Instead of abstract positions, the report offered concrete solutions, guidance on ID requirements, standards for early voting, and improved training for poll workers. We didn't try to settle every disagreement about voting policy, Crockett said while unveiling the report. We focused on making sure that whatever policies states choose, they're applied in ways that don't block eligible voters while still protecting election integrity. Bond added, this isn't about whether states should have certain laws. It's about making sure that when they do, implementation doesn't undermine the right to vote. That's a goal Americans across the spectrum can agree on. Their commendations won support from groups in both the left and the right. Several states even began adopting pieces of the framework. But perhaps the bigger impact was symbolic, showing that it was possible to engage with hot-button issues without reducing them to a shouting match. 1 year later, Bondi and Crockett reunited on the National Policy Forum to reflect on their journey. Asked what they had learned personally, both gave answers that went beyond politics. I've realized that acknowledging complexity and hearing different perspectives doesn't weaken your principles. Bondi said it actually strengthens your advocacy because you're addressing real concerns instead of pretending they don't exist. Crockett agreed. And I've learned that progress rarely comes from one side winning everything. It comes from finding places where competing values can work side by side. When Donovan asked whether they regretted anything about their now famous exchange, Crockett shook her head. Only that it took a televised debate to make it happen. Conversations like this should be happening all the time in our democracy. The fact that it was so unusual shows how far we've drifted from meaningful dialogue. Bondi smiled. My only regret is not taking out my earpiece sooner. Sometimes the best political moments happen when we stop following the script and start engaging as citizens. Of course, their dialogue didn't solve every dispute. Big divides remained over federal versus state authority, verification standards, and funding. But what they proved was that progress becomes possible when leaders stop talking past each other and start engaging honestly. For millions of Americans tired of partisan theater, the Bondi-Crockett exchange was a hopeful reminder that our discourse isn't broken, it's just badly structured. The real legacy wasn't a specific policy, but a change in expectations. Viewers began demanding the same authenticity from other leaders, putting subtle but real pressure on media outlets and public officials alike. As one commentator summed it up, Bondi and Crockett showed what can happen when political opponents truly listen. They didn't agree on everything, but they proved that the path forward in a divided democracy begins with engagement, not performance. In a media world dominated by loud voices and endless conflict, their conversation became a symbol of possibility. Prove that Americans still hunger for substance over spectacle. If this story of real political dialogue inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Our channel highlights the rare but powerful moments when leaders cut through the noise and have genuine solution-focused conversations. Share this video with friends and family who might be losing hope that our divisions can be bridged. And tell us in the comments what political issues would you like to see explored in this kind of honest, constructive format.